So that could be passed on to the Chinese government. We know that because of their national security legislation.
Carney's making some moves. Welcome back to Moose and Loose. My name's David. Today we've got Dominic LeBlanc getting demoted as Carney is choosing someone else to deal with the Trump administration. We've got Carney's new EV subsidy program coming out today. We've got a bunch of other stuff here. Let's jump into this. Starting this one off, we got Shreya Teese pointing this out. Liberals down 2% in the latest Nanos poll. This comes from this Nanos weekly tracking here. Liberals at 38.1 and the Conservatives at 36.5. Interesting. And the NDP at 11.1. The polling data is all over the place with all these different pollsters. Nanos showing the closest here of any of them recently. Here we've got weekly top 10 issues, 4-week change. Jobs in the economy is number 1. We're seeing January is this lighter color and February 13th is the darker one. Jobs in the economy has gone slightly down, but it's still number 1. You can see this one here, Trump and U.S. relations has gone up. So once again, the fear mongering. Mark Carney just stoking the fear here. He doesn't want to get a deal with Trump. We're seeing inflation going up. We're seeing healthcare becoming a bigger issue for Canadians and all the rest here. And once again, looking at this long-term tracking, this black line here is Donald Trump, and we see it goes up and down, it goes up and goes down. And here's a closer look at that. So we're back up right here because, well, you bring in the Gordie Howe Bridge and all that, it just stokes things up. And this one here, the long-term polling tracking, we're seeing this bounce around. This is where Carney got in right here. We had an election right here, and then you can see the Liberals have slowly been going down, the Conservatives slowly going up as a long-term trend, almost neck and neck now. And looking at the individual leaders here, well, we see Justin Trudeau came in really high. Carney never got as high as Justin Trudeau. He's almost 70, but I mean, he's consistently sitting up here at 63.5. Pierre Poilievre sitting at 45.1. This is the moment here where Justin Trudeau left. So immediately people are like, oh, good. Now I can vote Liberal again because that awful Justin Trudeau is gone. Look at this one here for the NDP. We see with no leader yet, their numbers are slowly starting to go back up. And the NDP leadership race ends next month at the end of March. So their new leader will start pulling back support. Depending on who it is, obviously, if they have someone very charismatic, that would be better for the Conservatives. And we're seeing the bloc here, Blanchette, getting more support in recent months here. And with that, we've also got this from Nano's survey. Most people view the US as a possible threat to Canadian sovereignty. That's what we're dealing with here in Canada. This is fear-mongering that was put out by the media. Donald Trump is not rolling in here with tanks. He's not going to come take us over. We've got Carney going over to India next week in early March. And with food inflation being high on the list of priorities for Canadians, we have this one. This is an even more extreme example than the previous one I showed. Yesterday, a steak on sale, $103.59 for a kilo. That's $46.99 per pound. As this guy, Tom Quiggins, pointing out, the highest he's ever seen in Canada for beef so far. $47 a pound. There's Carney's legacy right there. And with that, we've got new report reveals that nearly half of Canadian restaurants are unprofitable. 26% of them are operating at a loss and 18% are breaking even. That is so sad. We've got this one from Table Salt, major breaking. The government of Canada's latest debt management report from 2025 completely omits which countries own the 35% of Canadian bonds which have left the country, around $500 billion worth. We have no idea who we are paying $20 billion interest to per year. Yeah, that's an interesting piece of information. And we've got this one new report from the government of Canada shows that 65% of Canadian bonds are now owned by Canadians, a record low. This means that interest on the 35% of the 1.48 trillion owed is leaving Canada. Around $20 billion per year. Is this elbows up? Is this Canada winning? Where Canadians' money is fleeing our own country? And you can't blame Canadians for doing this. I mean, Canada's uninvestable. We've got quite the interesting update here from Nate Erskine-Smith. Liberal MP Nate Erskine-Smith's ex-campaign manager has been cited for falsifying records and other alleged Elections Act violations. This is coming from Blacklock's reporter here. Apparently reporting a third party's $1,500 campaign contribution as his own, providing return that contained false and misleading information, submitting backdated nomination contestants' statement of expenses, accepting all cash contributions in excess of $20 limit, submitting backdated or falsifying agreements to pay staff and honorariums to volunteers, and failing to disclose costs of Facebook ads and websites promotions as campaign expenses. Good start to the campaign there, Nate. Moving ahead, we've got Trump to convene the Board of Peace on Thursday, and, well, Canada's not invited. With that, we have Mark Nixon pointing this out. The EU did not pledge $1 billion to participate, but Trump invited them anyways. So we're seeing this back and forth between Trump and Carney. And well, I mean, I think this is directly because, well, Carney just joined a big EU pact, which we see here. Canada becomes the first non-European country to join Europe's new defense funding program. Obviously, this irks the Americans because they want us to be procuring our defense through them. Now, this doesn't help our trade negotiations. And well, this is right on track for Mark Carney's lack of negotiations with America. Canadians are getting duped here. They think he's pushing back, he's fighting back, elbows up and all this. He's not doing that. Canadians Canadians got absolutely duped and fooled. Perhaps Mark Carney is just more at home in Europe.
To tell
as a European, as a
European, I am a European actually. Yeah.
Oh, you are?
Yeah,
Oh.
Irish citizen. Yeah. So there you go.
Welcome.
Speaking as a European.
Yeah, time to go home, Carney. We got this account here pointing out Prime Minister Mark Carney blindsides Trump by forming a super alliance with 40 powerful countries to defeat this disastrous mega agenda. So obviously this is from a leftist account. But I mean, putting the language aside, yeah, I mean, joining with the European Defense Pact, do we really need to do that to be able to procure defense from them? Should we be procuring our defense from them? Not if it comes at the expense of Canadian jobs where we could be making a deal with the Americans. Carney has become one of Trump's most brilliant adversaries. This is hilarious. This account has no idea what's going on. Now, we do see this coming out today. Carney making some moves. We have Janice Charette named as Canada's chief trade negotiator with the U.S. Janice Charette, a former Privy Council clerk and High Commissioner to the United Kingdom, has been named chief trade negotiator with the United States at a pivotal time when Canada's heading into a review of the Continental Free Trade Agreement. Prime Minister's office announced the appointment on Monday, saying a statement that Ms. Charette will work closely with Mark Wiseman, the new ambassador to the United States. So I was going to point that out. Mark Wiseman here, he just got on the job too, as it says right here. Mark Wiseman arrived as Canada's ambassador to the U.S. on Sunday. He walked straight into a diplomatic crucible, as in yesterday. They're both new on the job, basically right now. And we got Melissa pointing this out. Carney just appointed Janice Charette. What else do we know about her? Well, the same Janice who wrote the PM a memo to invoke the Emergencies Act against peaceful Canadians, who 8 months later still defended it, yet just recently the use of the act was found to be illegal. Yeah, great choice there. Mark Carney really knows how to pick them. So let's break this down here. What's really happening is Mark Carney knows that he's just sitting there doing nothing. He hasn't even talked to Trump for 3 or 4 months. That's why Jamil Jivani just went down there. He just did a good interview with Brian Lilly on the Toronto Sun talking about this. It was an opportunity for Jamil to kind of just see what's going on there and kind of, poke the Liberals a little bit, say, hey, it's time to get moving, make a deal, or at least start negotiating. And well, Carney has nothing. He just wants to keep dragging this on. He's running some by-elections to test the waters here. I think he'll probably do a couple of them before he pulls the trigger and calls an election. But in the meantime, he has to show that he's doing something. He has to say something to Canadians. Look, I'm Canada strong. I'm fighting back against the evil Americans and Donald Trump. So he has to do something by appointing, you got Mark Wiseman here, bringing him in, saying, oh, we've got our new ambassador, my good banker buddy, Mark Wiseman. And he can point to Janice here and say, oh, we've got our new top negotiator, and they're working out a new plan, a new strategy. They can delay this out months and months until they want to call an election. They're not going to get a deal. Nothing's going to happen from this.
And this just into our newsroom as well. Canada has a new top negotiator to lead the CUSMA negotiations. Her name is Janice Charette, and she'll work with Canada's ambassador to the United States. Again, this is breaking news. We have just heard from the Prime Minister's office, who says in a statement, quote, with 4 decades of experience in public policy and diplomacy, Janice Charette brings extraordinary leadership, expertise, and a deep commitment to advancing Canada's interests. As chief trade negotiator, she will advance Canadian interests and a strengthened trade and investment relationship that benefits workers and industries in both Canada and the United States. So again, Canada...
Yeah, we know what's going on here. This is not going to lead to anything. Is she fighting for Brookfield and Goldman Sachs' best interests? Yeah, good question. So people in the comments here pointing out that her involvement in the Emergencies Act, that's good, because anytime you get this spread everywhere, not just in X, but comment section of YouTube, etc. I'm just so confused. Why did it take the Liberals so long to do this? Why was this not brought up as an option before Jamil went to the States? And wasn't Carney hired by Canadians to do this exact job himself? Good questions. Just don't know why the Liberals are always 5 steps back when coming to the same conclusions as the Conservatives. This is a great comment here. Moving ahead, we've got China's BYD overtakes Ford in global car sales for the first time in history. Yeah, China wants to dominate this market now. They've made this clear, and Mark Carney is trying to allow that to happen here in Canada. Meanwhile, Mark Nixon posting this, the visa-free travel that's going in, I believe it's tomorrow that starts. We've got a travel advisory right from the government of Canada's website. Going to China, exercise a high degree of caution. You can't make this stuff up. We've also got Carney's new electric vehicle affordability program going into play today. This new program encourages Canadians to buy or lease affordable electric vehicles, value less than $50,000, up to $5,000 for EVs and $2,500 for plug-in hybrids. Once again, this is just going to subsidize American vehicles most likely.
If you're thinking about buying an electric vehicle, Ottawa is making it more enticing with a federal subsidy for EVs that restarts today. It will pay up to $5,000 if the purchase price is below $50,000. Now, although that cap does not apply to Canadian-made EVs, the savings are applied by the dealership right at the time of sale, and the subsidy hinges on that final purchase price. Chinese-made EVs will not be eligible for the program. The CBC's Marianne Domain tells us more about this program.
This is all a part of the federal government's electric vehicle affordability program, and it starts today, trying to encourage Canadians to buy or lease a Canadian-made electric vehicle. And there are incentives here. Here's a look at some of the incentives. They include up to $5,000 for battery electric and fuel cell electric vehicles, and up to $2,500 for plug-in hybrid vehicles. Now, in order to qualify for these incentives, these electric vehicles have to be made in Canada or be made in a country with free trade agreements with Canada. That includes countries, of course, like the United States, Mexico, some European countries like Germany, even Japan and South Korea. There is a final transaction value of the vehicle that cannot exceed $50,000. There is no limit when it comes to the vehicles actually made in Canada.
Let's just stop that for a second there. So you see that it says ChargePoint. While Brookfield doesn't own ChargePoint, they do work with them. As we see here, leading office property owner meets sustainability goals while making tenants even happier. Brookfield offers ChargePoint through their 80 million square feet of business operations, their tenants, for EV charging with ChargePoint. Brookfield Office Properties is a global office property company that owns, manages, and develops upscale office buildings. A big part of Brookfield's corporate mission is led by their ownership and operation of sustainable real estate. So it goes on to talk about electric vehicles hitting the road. Brookfield's management look to installing EV charging stations in their parking facilities in a way of promoting hybrid and fully electric. Why? Well, it aligns with their business values. And then we've got Mark Carney running our country as the Brookfield Prime Minister of Canada. As it says here, it allows their businesses and tenants to offer EV charging to their employees. And here it is on CBC. Carney's pushing this thing, which directly is tied to Brookfield. It's so ridiculous.
When it comes to the vehicles actually made in Canada. Exempt from this right now, electric vehicles made in China. That's part of a separate deal that Prime Minister Mark Carney made with Beijing recently. But we do know that China makes more than 100 electric vehicle brands, including big U.S. brands like Tesla, which does have some of its models made in China. But even before all of this, there were already Chinese-made electric vehicles exported by Volvo and even Polestar to Canada. Now, the focus of this latest program is affordability. And we did hear from the president and CEO of Plug and Drive saying that this push for affordability to make things much more accessible for Canadians could lead to an increase in electric vehicle sales.
EVs are much cheaper to operate, so they are cheaper in the long run, even without a rebate.
Okay, so we're not going to listen to this. They're just going to push their narrative that they're doing here on CBC.
Well, other than the fact we've just had a very cold winter, and I don't know yet if we've seen how they perform, I think one of the main issues is that, yes, these are vehicles that are going to be hoovering up large amounts of data, pretty much, where you, not just where you drive and when you drive and where you live, but also it may be listening to what you say. It may look at which stores you're going to. So it really can, individually and en masse determine what's called patterns of life, which could be useful, for, to be fair, for automotive development and for looking at what could actually be, further research when they're developing their products and services, but also that could be passed on to the Chinese government. We know that because of their national security legislation, that, it could be basically giving a lot of this data, which is almost certainly to be stored in China, to the government. So, yeah, there are reasons to be concerned in that way.
We know that the Conservative leader, the leader of the opposition, Pierre Poilievre, and the Premier of Ontario, Doug Ford, have criticized the deal, with the Conservative leader calling the EVs roving surveillance systems. I think Doug Ford called them spy cars. What do you make of that?
So yes and no. I think, like I just said, we do need to be concerned and aware of the data issues. But that being said, all these politicians are on TikTok. A lot of these politicians are using devices and apps, which, quite frankly, harvest huge amounts of data, which are then sold by two third-party vendors who then go on to sell it even more. So even if you don't have a Chinese EV, if you're using a lot of apps, your data is being collected, harvested, and could easily be purchased by China. So this isn't just strictly
TikTok servers are in Texas. They're hosted by Larry Ellison. On September 14th, 2025, the Wall Street Journal reported that U.S. and China have reached a framework of a deal for the U.S. operation of TikTok to be sold to a consortium of investors in the U.S., including close ally Larry Ellison of Oracle. TikTok data in North America is being hosted in Texas at Oracle. It's not the same as data just going straight back to China from these vehicles.
A EV problem. I think we need to look at this in the context of a larger data problem that we have with regards to how our data is collected, harvested, and stored. China doesn't need EVs to spy on us, right? It can get a lot of the information that it needs right now. And I think that's the key thing here to remember.
No, I don't agree here. China wants to have any way possible to control people. If they have vehicles in Canada that can spy on us, they're not going to want to know what we ate for lunch. They're going to want to know where someone's going to work, who they're meeting with. If there's cameras recording this stuff and there's someone in the diaspora community that they want to threaten, then suddenly they have a way to spy on these people. And then they can use that as leverage against them. This is dangerous stuff. We shouldn't allow these Chinese EVs into Canada.
And in addition, I think it's really important for us to, put pressure on politicians to do more about that. Now, that being said, I think the issue is even if we were able to fix a lot of our data and privacy laws, it's not clear to me that a Chinese company would refuse to or would adhere to Canadian law if put under pressure by Beijing. So that is one mark against the spy cars as the Premier.
China's not going to comply. They don't care.
You put it. But I mean, this issue is just so much larger than just EVs. This is about large scale data collection by the Chinese government in ways that could potentially be weaponized against us.
Stephanie, I want to ask you, you said that people need to put pressure on the government to do something to make them safer or to mitigate some of these security risks. What kind of precautions would you like to see the government do to check for, frankly, security vulnerabilities in the incoming electric vehicles?
Well, it's so interesting because when I think about this issue, I think of the debates that we had over Huawei like a decade ago. And ultimately, the government did decide to ban Huawei, right? They said, there's pressure from allies and there was concerns about security, but also there was concern.
Yeah, from the Americans. And now they're turning against them. It's funny, going back, 6-8 months ago, I said, I'm surprised that the Liberals haven't allowed the Chinese EVs to come in. It's part of their green grift. And well, here we are. They are allowing it to come in. But in this context here, it's obviously just for Brookfield profits. But it works perfectly because it's all tied in with Carney's green grift.
Concerns about the fact that the government of China heavily subsidizes these companies and they are trying to position their state champion companies to undermine Western firms so that they will dominate in these sectors. That's also true of EVs. So I think that's one consideration. And we need to make sure that, as these cars are brought in, that, we are trying to figure out what is going to be the future of the auto industry. Now, that being said, with regards to the actual data collection, one of the things we did with Huawei prior to it being banned was we had the government set up something called white labs. And these were labs that were used to effectively monitor the technology, monitor the data, look for holes, look for backdoors and things like that to ensure that the technology was in fact as safe as possible and that effectively the government knew what it was doing when it was putting up these 5G systems. So I think in theory we could probably do the same with EVs, have these things tested as much as we can and try to apply as much layered security. But ultimately,
we already know that the Chinese government is trying to compromise our political system, not just the Liberal Party. They try to get any of their people into any of the parties so they have more power and control over us. Looking at the Moose chart, even just what I have on here, which is not all of the connections. Look at all these connections here to China. And most of these are through the Liberals. Justin Trudeau, Mary Ng, Han Dong, Yun Pao Wu. We've got Senator Victor Owen, David Eby, Peter Yuan, all these connections through all these different United Front Work Department linked organizations in Canada here going straight back to China and Xi Jinping. We do not need to be getting closer ties with China. It should be the exact opposite.